You break your back every day, and for what? Tessa snapped. We're still barely surviving. This isn't the life I agreed to, Nate. I thought I was marrying a man who could actually build something. Don't do this. No, we're doing this now. Then she dropped the papers in front of me. Tessa, what is this? For once, it's the truth. She handed me divorce papers while my boss stood behind her with the kind of smile that only comes from someone who thinks they've already won. You need to understand that moment first. Not because it was the worst day of my life. Because it wasn't. Not even remotely. 3 weeks before she walked into that break room and ripped my world apart, I had learned something that completely changed the game. The difference was that nobody knew it yet. Especially not them. I was standing beside the vending machine when it happened. Funny what the brain chooses to remember. Not the flickering fluorescent lights overhead. Not the stale coffee smell trapped in the walls. Not the sudden silence that swept through the room when she entered. I remember the machine. I fed it $4. It stole my money. That was my day in a nutshell. I just finished 9 brutal hours in the warehouse. My boots were soaked. My shirt clung to my skin. Every muscle on my back felt like it was negotiating its resignation. I still had paperwork waiting for me before midnight. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for the cheapest sandwich available so I could survive a few more hours. Then the door opened. Tessa walked in wearing heels I'd never seen before. Expensive ones. A designer handbag hung from her shoulder, definitely not purchased with our money. In one hand, she carried a manila envelope. But it was her expression that stopped me. She looked calm, not peaceful, resolved, like she'd already rehearsed this scene 100 times. And she wasn't alone.
Welcome to Wild Shadow Tale. Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay human, and we'll see you very soon for another powerful stories.
Behind her stood Drew Callahan, my boss, leaning casually against the doorframe like he owned the place. Because technically he did. For 3 years, I'd endured his fake smiles and carefully disguised insults. 3 years of being called buddy in that condescending tone people use when they don't respect you. 3 years of watching him take credit for work I bled over while I convinced myself patience would eventually pay off. Now he was standing behind my wife. My mind searched desperately for another explanation. It found none. We need to do this now, Tessa said. Her voice was cold, efficient, the same way someone asks a stranger to move their car. She slid the envelope across the table. I looked down. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The words blurred for a second. I didn't touch it. Tessa, I said quietly. What is this? She folded her arms. Me finally being honest. That hurt more than I expected. Drew remained silent. Just watching. Expensive watch. Perfectly tailored shirt. The smug expression of a man who believes he's 5 moves ahead of everyone else. I can't keep living like this, she said. You work nonstop, and we're still struggling. You come home exhausted every night, talking about overtime as if that's success. She shook her head. This isn't a life. The way she said my name made it sound like a closed chapter. I've been trying. I know. Then she glanced at Drew, and everything suddenly made sense. Every unexplained late night. Every missed weekend. Every distant conversation. Every instinct I'd ignored because I didn't want to believe it. The pieces finally snapped together. You're leaving me for him. She didn't even blink. I'm leaving because I deserve better. For a second, anger flashed through me. I should have shouted. Should have thrown a punch. Should have smashed something. Anything. Instead, I watched her remove her wedding ring and place it on the table as casually as returning an item she no longer wanted. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. The pain disappeared. Not completely, but enough. Because for the first time, I wasn't seeing the woman I married. I was seeing the woman she'd always been. The next 3 days felt colorless. I went to work, answered emails, signed reports, followed routines that suddenly felt meaningless. Half her clothes were gone. The bathroom shelves sat nearly empty. Only a forgotten hair tie and a nearly empty lotion bottle remained behind, like evidence from a life that never really belonged to me. By the 4th day, the silence became impossible to ignore. That's when I finally opened the letter. It had been sitting under a pile of overdue bills for nearly 3 weeks. A thick cream-colored envelope. My full legal name printed across the front. Nathan James Cole III. A name I rarely used. A name reserved for legal documents and funerals. Not for warehouse workers buying sandwiches from broken vending machines. I'd almost thrown it away twice. The law firm's name meant nothing. The address did. Downtown. High-rise district. The kind of place where powerful people make decisions about lives they'll never personally see. I nearly ignored it. The only reason I didn't was because I assumed it was bad news. Debt collectors. Medical obligations. Some forgotten financial disaster. Bad news was usually the only surprise life ever delivered. So I went. The office looked like another world. Walnut walls. Leather chairs. Silence so expensive it practically had its own zip code. A silver-haired attorney stood up when I entered. Actually stood. As if I mattered. "Mr. Cole," he said warmly. "Thank you for coming. My name is Gerald Ashworth." I sat down awkwardly in my work boots, still smelling faintly of diesel and warehouse dust. Then he changed everything. "Your uncle passed away approximately 3 weeks ago." I frowned. My uncle? The memory surfaced slowly. A funeral. My mother's funeral. A man in a dark suit. A handshake. A business card. $5,000 and a handwritten note telling me to use it wisely. Then 20 years of silence. I barely knew him. Gerald nodded. "He knew enough about you." He pushed a folder toward me. Inside were pages filled with numbers. Trusts. Investments. Equity statements. Figures so large they stopped looking real. My eyes couldn't process them. "Your uncle spent 4 decades building an investment empire," Gerald explained. "Technology acquisitions. Industrial holdings. Strategic ownership positions." Then he paused. At the time of his passing, his estate was valued at approximately $470 million. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. "There has to be a mistake." "There isn't." He met my eyes. "You are the sole beneficiary." For days earlier, my wife had walked away because I wasn't enough, because I was ordinary, replaceable, small. Now a stranger was calmly informing me that I possessed more wealth than most people could spend in several lifetimes. But then came the sentence that changed everything. "Included among the inherited assets," Gerald said, pointing to another document, "is a controlling interest in Meridian Group Holdings." I stared at the page. I knew that name. Everyone at my company knew it. Meridian Group Holdings sat at the very top of the corporate ladder. The parent company, the organization behind every building, every contract, every executive decision. The company that owned the warehouse where I worked. The company that controlled Drew Callahan's career. The company that now belonged to me. Tessa thought she had abandoned a struggling warehouse employee. What she didn't know was that she'd just walked away from the man who now owned the ground beneath her new partner's feet. I sat quietly in that leather chair, and for the first time since she left, I wasn't grieving. I was planning. What happened next surprises most people. Because I didn't rush. I could have ended Drew's career immediately. One meeting, one vote, one signature. Security would have escorted him out before dinner. But years of being invisible had taught me something valuable. Patience is a weapon, especially when nobody believes you're capable of using it. 2 weeks later, I resigned. No dramatic confrontation. No speeches. No revenge monologue. I handed in a short resignation letter, emptied my locker, shook hands with the few people who had treated me decently, and walked away. Just another burned-out employee. At least that's what everyone believed. Drew barely looked up when I placed the envelope on his desk. "Probably for the best," he said with a smirk. "Some people just aren't built for pressure." I almost smiled. Almost. The divorce finalized without drama. 19 days later, Tessa married him. The wedding photos were exactly what you'd expect. Luxury rented by the hour. 4 smiles. Champagne they couldn't actually afford. And neither of them had the slightest idea that the foundation beneath their perfect new life was already beginning to crack. The wedding looked exactly the way people imagine success should look. Perfect flowers. Perfect lighting. Perfect smiles. The kind of event designed less for love and more for photographs. Tessa stood beside Drew glowing with satisfaction. smiling like she'd finally escaped the life she never wanted and stepped into the one she believed she deserved. Drew kept one hand around her waist and wore the confidence of a man who had never experienced consequences. People kept sending me pictures. They disguised it as concern. Thought you should see this. Just making sure you're okay. But I was okay. Better than okay. What none of them understood was that while Drew and Tessa were celebrating their future, that future was already being quietly dismantled behind the scenes. Gerald moved carefully. No drama. No threats. No flashy confrontations. Just professionals doing what professionals do. Forensic accountants, compliance investigators, employment attorneys, auditors with decades of experience and absolutely no interest in office politics. Together, they started digging through every division owned by Meridian Group Holdings. But I gave them one instruction. Start with Callahan Logistics. What they uncovered was uglier than I imagined. Much uglier. Drew hadn't simply been arrogant. He'd been robbing the company blind. Kickback schemes hidden inside vendor contracts. Inflated transportation invoices routed through businesses connected to family members. Maintenance budgets slashed while executive bonuses mysteriously increased. Safety programs quietly gutted. Workplace injuries buried. Overtime records altered. Complaints erased. Problems hidden. Evidence disappeared. The deeper we looked, the darker it became. 2 harassment cases had been quietly settled and buried. A supervisor who refused to falsify compliance reports had been pushed out of the company entirely. Workers suffered injuries that should have triggered investigations, but instead vanished in a paperwork no one was supposed to see. And every dollar saved came directly from the people doing the actual work. The warehouse crews, the drivers, the floor managers, the employees who showed up every day believing honesty still mattered. I met many of them personally, not in corporate offices, not in boardrooms, in coffee shops, church basements, parking lots, anywhere they felt safe enough to speak. One woman sat across from me for nearly an hour before she finally gathered the courage to tell me what had really happened. Another employee brought documents he had hidden for almost a year because he was terrified of losing his job. Story after story painted the same picture. Fear, intimidation, retaliation. Drew had built an environment where people stayed silent because silence felt safer than the truth. And for years, it worked. While Tessa was posting honeymoon photos online with captions like, "Finally living the life I deserve," I was reviewing sworn statements capable of destroying everything she thought she'd gained. The strange part? By then, it wasn't even personal anymore. At first, maybe some small part of me wanted revenge. But the more evidence I saw, the less this became about a broken marriage. This was bigger. This was about power. About what happens when people spend years believing they're untouchable. And for the first time in a very long time, someone was finally paying attention. 90 days later, I returned. It was raining hard that morning. The kind of rain that turns glass skyscrapers into cold, gray mirrors. I stood across the street from Meridian Group headquarters wearing a charcoal suit that still felt unfamiliar and watched executives hurry through the revolving doors carrying umbrellas and overpriced coffee. They moved with the certainty of people who never questioned whether they belonged. 3 months earlier, I'd entered through a warehouse loading dock. That morning, I walked through the front entrance. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. And yet nobody recognized the man they were letting inside. The board meeting had been scheduled under an intentionally boring title: Ownership Transition and Strategic Review. Nothing alarming. Nothing suspicious. Just another corporate meeting. At least that's what Drew thought. When I entered the boardroom, most of the seats were already occupied. 12 board members, senior executives, legal advisors, assistants lining the back wall, water glasses untouched, laptops open, and there sat Drew Callahan, relaxed, comfortable, completely unaware. He glanced up casually when I walked in. At first, he barely registered me. Then recognition hit. I watched it happen in stages. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally, fear. Real fear. The kind that reaches the eyes. Gerald stepped forward and closed the door. Then he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. Every conversation stopped. I would like to formally introduce Nathan James Cole III, sole heir to the Raymond Cole estate and majority controlling shareholder of Meridian Group Holdings. He paused. Effective immediately, your new chairman. The silence that followed felt endless. Drew stared at me. No, that's impossible. His voice cracked. He worked for me. I met his gaze. I did. Then I walked calmly to the head of the table. Please sit down. For a second, it looked like he might refuse. Then reality caught up with him. Slowly, he sat. I opened the folder in front of me. Over the last 90 days, a comprehensive investigation has been conducted across all Meridian divisions. Every eye in the room fixed on me. The findings reveal significant financial misconduct, legal exposure, and ethical violations. No division performed worse than Callahan Logistics. I clicked the presentation remote. The first slide appeared. Vendor fraud. The second, safety violations. The third, suppressed injury reports. The fourth, harassment settlements. The fifth, retaliation against whistleblowers. The sixth, financial manipulation tied directly to executive compensation. The room grew colder with every page. By the third slide, nobody believed this was routine. By the sixth, Drew looked physically ill. Those numbers are misleading, he interrupted. His voice sounded desperate now. You don't understand how operations work at this level. I nodded. Maybe not. Then I changed slides. But I understand enough to know you approved a six-figure bonus for yourself 11 days after denying replacement safety equipment for warehouse workers. Silence. Absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. I continued. Bank records. Contracts. Witness testimony. Internal emails. Compliance reports. Names. Dates. Amounts. Every piece carefully documented. No anger. No shouting. No theatrics. Just facts. One after another. Like bricks building a wall he couldn't climb. When I finished, I closed the folder. The sound echoed through the room. Drew Callahan. I looked directly at him. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. His face emptied. You are barred from company property, denied severance benefits, and referred for civil and criminal review pending legal counsel recommendations. His chair slammed backward as he jumped to his feet. This is revenge. The accusation echoed through the room. I held his gaze, then answered calmly. No. I paused. This is accountability. Security officers appeared beside the door. 3 years of arrogance. 3 years of manipulation. 3 years of treating people as disposable. Gone in less than 20 minutes. Tessa learned about it before lunch. Not from me. Men like Drew always make one phone call when their world collapses. And it's usually home. She called me 3 times. I ignored every call. On the fourth, I answered. There was no greeting. Only breathing. Fast. Uneven. Panicked. What did you do? She demanded. I looked out across the rain-soaked city from an office that now belonged to me. Nothing extraordinary. What does that mean? It means I did my job. Her voice sharpened. Drew said you embarrassed him in front of everyone. Drew embarrassed himself. I said it quietly. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences. Silence. Then anger. This is about me. No, I replied. This is about injured workers. Falsified reports. Fraud. Threats. People who spent years being ignored. Another silence. Longer this time. Then her voice softened. You could have warned us. Us. Even now she still said us. As if she and Drew were somehow entitled to consideration. As if fairness was something they expected after showing so little of it. I leaned back in my chair. I owed the employees honesty. I paused. I owed the company integrity. Then I finished. I didn't owe either of you a warning. The following weeks moved fast. Without Drew's executive salary, their carefully constructed lifestyle started collapsing almost immediately. The luxury SUV disappeared first, then the housekeeper, then the private club memberships, then the invitations. Funny how quickly certain friendships disappear when the money does. Industry contacts stopped returning calls. Former employees began filing claims. Reporters started asking questions. New allegations surfaced every week. The man who once strutted through warehouses like he owned the world became known online for entirely different reasons. Fraud, misconduct, negligence. The headlines multiplied. A month later, Tessa called again. This time she wasn't angry. She was crying. Not dramatically. Not for sympathy. Just exhausted. The kind of crying that comes when reality finally breaks through denial. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "I'll let the silence settle. Some lessons sound louder when nobody interrupts them." Finally, I spoke. "No." She waited. "You didn't make a mistake." The words landed heavily. "You made a choice." I heard her breathing catch. Then nothing. The line eventually went quiet. Over time, I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. The marriage was deteriorating. Debt, arguments, resentment, broken expectations. Turns out dreams built on appearances don't survive reality very well. Drew spent his days blaming everyone but himself. The board, the auditors, the company, me, anyone except the person staring back from the mirror. But nothing had been taken from him. The protection had simply disappeared. And that's what real accountability looks like. Not public humiliation, not revenge, not headlines. It's the moment people are forced to sit alone with the consequences of their own choices. No distractions, no excuses, no one left to blame. Sometimes I still think about Tessa, not with anger. That faded a long time ago. I think about the cheap hair tie she left behind in the bathroom. One forgotten object, one tiny detail that didn't fit into the future she'd planned. The future she thought she'd secured. She handed me divorce papers, believing she was leaving behind an ordinary man. A man who was too small, too broke, too stuck. What she never realized was that while she was planning her exit, fate had already rewritten the entire story. She walked away before discovering who I truly was. And by the time she finally learned the truth, it no longer mattered, because some doors only close once, and some choices only get made once.